My name is Willie Struss, and I'm here today from the Ames Historical Society together with Meg Spears, who is also a member of the Ames Historical Society, to have a conversation with longtime Ames resident Barbara Mosier. Do you prefer Barbara or Barb?
No, Barbara.
Barbara, okay. Before we begin, we must make a statement here. Do we have your permission to record this conversation and to have it available at the Ames Historical Center and Museum for public access?
Yes.
Thank you. Would you tell us first about your parents, who they were, and when they came to Ames?
My mother came from Maxwell, Iowa, and my father actually came from Colo. That's where we lived. They were married, I think, in 1918 or something of that nature. That's getting a little kind of fading. But my father lived in Colo. His father was a physician. So my father, he thought he was first class because he had a Buick with wire wheels.
Oh, those were the days, weren't they?
Those were the days. And his father insisted, even though they owned a big farm, that he get an education. My father was very much about everybody getting an education. So he would drive that flashy car over here and graduated in animal husbandry. He was very fond of animals and he loved the farm.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather and my father had that farm for quite a while when all of a sudden we didn't have a farm anymore and we didn't have a bank, but we did have a physician.
Mm-hmm.
So those were the times when my father, during that period, they married my mother. So you see, she was not too far away with Maxwell in a car. Then let's see, what shall I say? Anyway, whatever it was in those days, they got together and very soon were married.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was 18, to be really honest with you. Then when the farm left us, or vice versa, we went as a family. I had two brothers into Colo to have a house to live, because my grandfather had a large house, beautiful walnut stairway, and it was just a perfect thing.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the matter is that house is still there next to the Methodist church, but things have changed, and it used to be that I thought that we had, because we did, a big, big yard, but down at the one end we had a garage and a barn, because my grandfather had a Buick, my father had a car, and there had to be a stall for a horse and buggy, because my grandfather was a physician that went out to the farm they didn't come to you. And in the winter time, when it was really bad, then he had to take the horses out.
The horse would get there when the car couldn't.
You betcha.
What was the family name then?
At that time,
Your
Hostetter.
Holstetter.
Hostetter. Hostetter. Hostetter.
Okay.
A lot of people put a little bit more in than that, but that's what it was. And there have been lots of Hostetters, but we are a Hostetter.
Holstetter.
I guess that's because he went to college. I don't know why it was. That maybe was the way it was.
Okay.
Anyway, it was very difficult, to be really honest with you, about what to do about a job. My dad didn't have a job.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather did. in this big house, and I think it was about half the size I think it was, because I was about 5. And I thought it was a castle, of course.
Of course.
Anyway, my father got a job, and I think with a meat packing business. I can't tell you what it was. I'd like to say it was Hormel or one of those. And he sent us, and we went to Burlington, Iowa. I believe I was in about second or third grade. I didn't seem to mind the move. My brothers did, because they had friends in Coral. But our movement then of my whole family was about every year. We moved first to Burlington, then we came back to Nevada and lived, and then my father got a job with the same company in Detroit. Each time we were just there about a year. And then after that, we'd move. I think the hardest part was on my brothers, really, because they would just get about to be a football player or whatever. And I guess that I was so young, I just really didn't care. Just went from, somebody said to me one time, "What church did you go to?" And I said, whatever was my good friend. I only was there 1 year, and then it was time to move again.
And this was the time of the Great Depression.
Yes, very, very. Everybody had a job. I was just the littlest kid, and we, all three of us, had a paper route. This was in Fort Dodge when we finally got to Fort Dodge. And but my mother usually went with me because I was too little really to do it. I expect the hardest part of that was, at that time nobody had any money for the papers. They wanted the papers, but when you had to go out to collect for the papers, they kind of forgot that they didn't have it, or it was too much of a, what shall we say, it was too much for them to have, and a few things like that. That was really quite difficult, and I think I had a lot of tears over that. But we survived. The boys had a tough time. They really and truly did. They never really had an opportunity to really get in and be a football player or to be a whatever you wanted to be. I think Fort Dodge was our last one, and I believe it was, my father was sent to Ames. We were delighted to come. I'm trying to think. That must have been 1933, because I was really getting up there kind of old, I think, old enough to be in like the 10th grade. And he had a sister who had a husband that worked for the college. Now, mind you, we hadn't ever accumulated any kind of money that we could buy a house or rent a house or do any of those things, because moving as rapidly as we did, it was just mostly into a house and then out. So when we came to Fort Dodge, came from Fort Dodge, we stayed with the Truman Mannings. Now, they were a family that had been in Ames for a long, long time. And Mary Manning was my father's sister. So we moved in with them. Now, as a kid, how old do you suppose I was at that time? Well, 10th grade. Probably started school when I was 5 or 6. Well, choose a number, I don't care. When we were small children, and of course we did have fun things with the Mannings. We were all little kids. That was fun to have their children. But when you get to be 14, 15, and 16, you're not very fun. And you don't really like what you're doing or living, and one here or there, and I think there was one car and 6 people. But they saved our lives because they gave us a place to room and board. My father worked as a, well, I hate to say this word, butcher, because we don't have such a thing anymore, thank goodness. Enough time to, living with the Mannings, we kind of got a little bit of money of some sort. Now, where this all came from, I can't tell you that, except at the same time that he was working in the butcher shop, which was on Main Street, I believe, he became very interested in food. And he always did the turkeys, always did the ham, always did the whatever. And he really was pretty good cook. So when this little room or little tiny house out in College area, right now, it would be a block from, it must be almost right in what church would it be? It left me just like that. That's what happens to me, where the bank is now, and then the
Episcopal church?
Yes, the Episcopal church then was on the Lincoln Way, and then the house for the minister, and here was this little house on a little diagonal. And that was when just the rails of the little, was it called dinghy?
Dinky.
Dinky, that would come from downtown, but it was no longer used. But that's where it kind of cut us off. So it was sort of a diagonal little thing. Directly across the street were 3 huge houses, not apartments, but a lot of rooms, where boys would come to school, and there would be a board across where he was going to feed these boys, and the room over on the opposite side. They are all now apartments, big apartments. So we were then in this house, we were lower level, let's put it that way, the family. Gradually, my brothers, I'll tell you about that a little bit more, but anyway, at that particular time, there was this little house, and I think it fed about 20 boys. And across the street, we had about 12 rooms for rent, so that would be about 20-some boys lived in these houses. Now, we can begin my life pretty quick here. I think it's amazing that they could buy 21 meals for $21. I can remember that
meal.
from the boys.
And that was not just a plain hamburger.
No, no, oh
That
no.
was a full
And
meal.
hamburger, we didn't have a lot of hamburgers. We had a lot of meatloaf and that sort of thing. And these boys would come and they would rent the room across, and then we had the others down there. And it grew rapidly because it was a relatively cheap, should we say, or
Inexpensive.
inexpensive sounds a lot better. Back then it was whatever. I will tell you that by this time I had started college, and I jumped in. Those were the days when you declared, when you decided to go to college, what were you going to end up being? And I just said home economics. So not only did I go to school, I worked over at the little cottage. I often think about why we all lived physically. We didn't have an electric dishwasher. We didn't have anything like that whatsoever. We had refrigerators, with ice, and eventually we got a really big town and had really, really refrigerators. But at that time, when I began to think about it, what my job was at the Solar Inn, I should tell you sometime about how that name came around. And it was me that was, first things, everybody worked, I will tell you that. Everybody worked. But my mother worked down at Tilden's store, and when it was 5 o'clock, then she would be able to come and also work in the restaurant.
Okay, excuse me, but this was not the Solar Inn on
No,
now?
no.
No.
Okay.
We're in the little box by
Right.
the Episcopal Church.
And
Did
we're
you-
still on Lincoln Way.
Still
On Lincoln Way, all right. But did you list this then as a restaurant, and would it have a name, or?
This
No.
is way before that.
Yes.
Way before that,
That's
okay.
just, we're still back here. I thought
Okay.
maybe we should start up the other end, but
No,
I'll just
this is
finish
fine.
it. I'll finish this. My brother John was in college because he was going to be like Grandpa. He was going to be a physician. My brother Hugh, who was the oldest of the boys, really was a rather. I always felt sorry for my brother Hugh. He was my favorite. Because we just kind of jerked him around, it seemed to me, as I began to think about his time, that he never really ever got settled in a group. I guess that's what I would like to say. And he didn't want to go to college. But that was okay. He worked in this little box. And we did that for quite a few years. I personally hated it. I didn't like those boys particularly, and they didn't particularly like me. I didn't like cleaning up those rooms, of which two boys would be living in one room. I said to my mother, all we ever do is pick up somebody's underwear. These boys don't know how to do anything. What do you suppose this is, 1940? Well, anyway, about that, let's say 1940, 50. I was not happy with my job over there, but that's what my father said we would do. We would all work, and that would take care of the situation. There was one boy my mother thought was absolutely fabulous. I thought he was kind of a jerk coming from Guthrie Center, but my attitude wasn't the best during those years. Anyway, I'm going to skip along here. After so many years, there was a restaurant on Welch Avenue called Cooneys Restaurant. Do any of you remember that?
That's before our time.
Okay, that's before your time. Well, of course, I would like to tell you that across the street was the barber shop, and it was a this and that. But it was on Welch Avenue, about right smack in the middle of Welch Avenue, going up from the Lincoln Way up. That's just about a block, isn't it? A little bit. And a little off the, you don't need to say this, but down on the main drag of the Lincoln Way, Welch, the Hunsikers had a little restaurant. Herb.
Yes, that's where he got his start, isn't it?
Did you? Yeah, that's where he got his start.
Right.
And I think about that when I think of all how kind he has been to this Ames. And that's where they worked just as hard as we did. Well, I thought we were going to have a great time by the time we got over to Cooneys, but it was the same. First I was the register, then I was the salad person, then I was the pies, and then I was served the boys. Although at that time, that wasn't just boys, that was everybody got to eat at the Cooneys restaurant. Now this is where I can't tell you how many years we were there. The war came along, and it was during the time when the Navy was over on the college, and they lived in the dormitories over there.
Hamel Court.
And then, yes, and then the houses that were on the actual, where the dormitories are now. Anyway, they were quite the good people that came in, and I liked all of those guys. They were pretty neat, but what was around Ames just didn't apparently suit me, or me, them, one or the other, or whatever it was. But during that time, and I just can't tell you what year that was. After about, well, I could tell you a little bit. Both my brothers went to war at that time, and my brothers were both pilots.
And this is the Second World War.
This is the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
We had, my oldest brother, Hugh, had the route from England to Germany, the 51s, and he finally made it without being killed, which made us feel really good. And then my brother John, who was taken out of college to go, he was a teacher of airplane flights. So he stayed in the country here and was very happy to be there. I think the war was very hard on my brother, but when he came back, he said, well, to his father, yes, I'll help you here. Well, then this little sign, after my brother was there, said, restaurant for sale, South Duff, as I think that's what it was said. So he convinced my father to sell the Cooney Cafe, and we would move out to the Solar Inn. That name came from somebody in Nevada who had built that restaurant and gave it a name, Solar Inn, and was only interested in it for 1 year. Didn't want it anymore. So that's when we moved to the South Duff. At this time, you know, remember, a lot of people were coming back from the war, and we had 2 restaurants in town at that time that were restaurants, where you came in and ordered something and I took it to you. We were one, and Chef's Inn out west. They were good friends, and they both had that kind. I kind of remember a few little places around in Ames, Iowa at that time where you could buy a hamburger for a dime. I do remember that. Do you remember that? Well, you're so young. Anyway, here we go again on another restaurant, and I was about as happy as I was when I was 11th grade. I didn't want to be there. I had a degree, and what they were teaching me at Iowa State, my father didn't think was a very good thing to do. I mean, as far as the restaurant business was concerned, it was an entirely different situation. I think about that I remembered I studied very, very hard on diabetes. And I look at it now and I think, well, we didn't even know what we were doing back there, or how things have helped, let's put it that way, how things have gone higher and higher and better all the time. So the business did grow. Many people would come out to eat. Now, at that time, the university was teaching, you know, creamed carrots, dried beef, baked potatoes, and we were cooking fried chicken, French fries. And it grew, and it grew, and it grew. It was a far better thing for my father and my brother Hugh. In the meantime, my brother John had gone on to Iowa City to be a physician. I was just kind of out there being the waitress, the register, sweep it up, clean it up, wash the tablecloths. I really was not a very good employee. I was there because that's what my father said we always did. We always worked for the families, and that's the way we survived. And so I did. And as far as having an education, it was just going from being 16 to 21 or something about that nature. It wasn't a great big fun. It was a job. I had a job. We were in that business a long time. I felt, well, in the meantime, that boy my mother just adored, I thought he was not so bad when he got to college, because he was also working his way through college besides that. And then he would work for my dad once in a while because there were nights. So it got to be a little bit more fun for me at that time because love entered into life. And I went over, I was so tickled when I got pregnant with the first child because I knew then that I didn't have to work all the time, because in the restaurant business at that time, you had a job, but if by chance you needed to take your laundry home, you just would say, Barbara, I was on the phone all the time to come to work. Every relative we ever had also worked. They came from Nevada, they came from Maxwell, they came around if we needed them. Pretty soon, the transportation that we have downtown decided to have, I think every month, they would have a big learning situation, and they would take one part of the room of the Solarian for their, whatever they were going to do. I think it was where the next road was gonna go. Also drank an awful lot. And that I got to tell you about the Solar Inn. It was one of the places in Chef's Inn and the country club that could have liquor. Because at that time, unless you were a club or that, you couldn't buy liquor at all. But if you wanted to have a drink, then you went to one of those places, because that's when you could, now, they couldn't bring their liquor in. They had to buy it, they really did. I'm just jumping around because I've got so many things to think about. Do you know, strangely enough, that one of the worst problems that we had at the Solar Inn was theft? Because it was way out there, and it was a wonderful place to beat up the front door and take all the cash that was there, but mainly a lot of food left there that people would take. And
Just break in,
there was a
just
ton-
break in and help
just
themselves.
break in and help yourself, yeah. And even though we had, just all kinds of security, still they got smarter and better than we were. That was a big problem. Another interesting one is that many times there we had the 7-day Adventists come in for, say, Sunday dinner. I'm going to begin to tell you the worst parts. They don't eat meat. And this restaurant that sold fried chicken, French fries, and blah, 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 all we had was cottage cheese and a green salad, and I mean, it was a strange situation. They were always glad to be there. And we did the best we could and the best we knew what to do. So anyway, that was kind of a problem. But I'm going to tell you now that the restaurant was a restaurant, but there were 3, I hope I can remember them, that were the worst days of the year. And it was for everybody. Number 1, I think, that was the very worst day at the Solar Inn was Mother's Day. Because we worked, but everybody wanted to take their mother out
Out to
on
dinner.
Mother's Day.
Sure.
And we had, there was no way we could take the number of people that wanted to be there. And we couldn't get enough help, and we had an imbalance of plenty of people to cook, nobody to serve it, and huge, at that time, that was the worst, I think, for the people who wanted to take Mother out to eat, and for us that had to try to do it. That, I believe, was the worst day we ever had in a year. Nowadays, I just say, I'm just having a hamburger. I don't want a thing on Mother's Day. Just give me a hamburger. It was okay. The next one, let's see, the next one was Christmas. Because we were open from the crack of dawn until I think we finally did close at 5. But that day, I hated everybody in the world because I was the only one that was working. Well, not really, but all the rest of these people were coming in and being fed and being taken care of, but me, always me. So my attitude about it was not the best in my working, but you see, we were all working. What good would it have been for me not to be there? My father, my mother, my sweetheart by this time, and me, and then 2 or 3 other girls that would work. So I went, I just wasn't very nice a lot of times, which is awful. Anyhow, the next one I think would have to be Visha. It was just horrible, because we couldn't get any help was number one, was because so many of the kids were students, then so that was the hardest day, was during the Visha series and so forth. Well, I had this child, and I knew I wasn't gonna have to be a waitress anymore, but my brother just said, get a big uniform and come to work. We'll put you in the kitchen, that doesn't make any difference. But I guess I did have a little while off because she was born, and my husband by that time worked from 8 to 5, and then I from 5 on to 10. There was a period there where we hardly met because I was working, he was working, baby was crying, I suppose, I don't know. And by the time I had the second child, I said, I'm not doing this anymore. No more, no more, no more. Now I'm going to skip over a lot of that and get to the end here. And that is, an opportunity came to sell the solar inn. My brother jumped at it. He was probably 65 at that time. My father was still cooking. I don't know what. I'll just, in that period right there, I'm going to tell you that my father wanted desperately for my brother to buy a microwave that he'd read about in the paper. And my brother said, they come here for home-cooked food, we'll have nothing of a microwave. And every time I hit that button out there in the kitchen, or you heat something up or do something with it, I think about that every time. No way was my brother gonna have a microwave in his restaurant. Okay, so we sold it. He was delighted. My father was kind of wondering what he was going to do the rest of his life. By that time, he's about 85. And for 1 year, this boy and his wife that had never, ever run a restaurant just died on him right there. Couldn't do it. Absolutely couldn't do it. So Hugh, his wife, they'd just learned how to be a normal person, and they had a place that they would go in the winter for just 1 year. And by the time we got the restaurant back, oh, it was just meddling, just awful. I mean, they forgot how to sweep, they forgot how to do anything, and so it had to be totally redone physically inside. Plus the fact is that the food was not correct, it wasn't the same, it wasn't the good old country club. And so you had to build that business back up. Guess who went to work? Me. I've just felt like I've lived in that place forever. Anyway, it was built up and they were just ready again to open, and I guess we were open for about a year when an opportunity to sell it again. But not to a restaurant. Do you remember it? Were you here? And I think their name was Rodemaker. Bought that building, and I think it was plumbing, wasn't it? I believe it was plumbing that they were interested in at that particular time. But that was the end of the Solar Inn. The name, the Solar Inn, came from this boy in Nevada when they built it. That was their, well, I don't know why they called it Solar Inn, but they did.
It actually sounds very modern with solar heat now and everything.
Right,
Yeah.
that's right. Now that's my life. That's just about my life and about my family. They are no longer living. My brother Hugh died. My brother John died. They were both 80, 85. My mother also died. My husband died. I'm here.
You're here.
I'm here. I have 2 children.
Mm-hmm.
One is Dallas, one is Minneapolis. One is a physician, one is a computer nut.
And there you are.
And I'm here.
May I ask now, and if you don't want to say, you don't have to, how old are you now?
I'm 91, just about to be 92.
Just about to be 92.
Just about in October, I will be 92.
You've had an interesting life.
Yes,
If
I
you
was.
could, if you could talk to today's kids, what would you say?
Today,
Mm-hmm.
I would say for everything that you ever earned in every kind of a job, you had to have a coin jar or something of that nature. We had to save money. We learned how to save money because we didn't have any money.
Right.
And as I can still remember when I was this little kid, my mother said, "We must be grateful. I can bake bread." And she did. I remember when I went to school, I was so embarrassed because they had Wonder Bread. And my mother baked the bread. Now that was about that. Anyway, I remember that now as I sometimes once in a while squeeze a little something that's frozen. But that's what I would say. If you don't have any money, you won't spend it. There's such a thing as a false sense of wealth today with the kids. They do not know about you must save. I don't care if it's just a quarter or
Mhm.
$1.50. You know, $10.50 does quite a lot. And that's what I would say.
And don't buy anything you can't pay for.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Right to this day, I still pay cash and they look at me like I'm insane or that I can't count it out, that sort of thing. So, anyway, that's what I would say. And we have the young boys out here for maintenance. And you know, all of a sudden it's kind of getting to them that they bought this cabin or a canoe or a this or that. And then they had to pay for the weddings and all this and that. And you know, the weddings just kill me. $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. I just stood here and married the guy my mother wanted me to, and I kind of liked him too. So that was her, by that time. But I remember I had a pink wool dress with a hat that had pink feathers. I have no idea, probably paid, suppose I paid maybe $15 for it, maybe. Wore it out. I didn't get to save it in a box. I wore it out.
Sure. You bought a dress that you knew you could wear afterwards.
You're right.
Yeah.
I will tell you also one thing about the other part of my life, which was my husband's. He came from Guthrie Center that, are you so full you don't want to hear anymore? Anyway, his mother was a school teacher in Guthrie Center forever because they also lost their farm. She went to town and taught them for the rest of her life. He came to school with $100 and got a job with my father. And he went to college. He was, you gotta help me on this one now. He went to work, I wanna say Schilletter, but that's not right. But it's a Snetti,
That's right.
but it was all of the stuff for the college, was all of the well, what shall I say? All of the main kinds of accounting were women. That's it, and if you made a mistake or whatever at all. But he was selected when he wanted to be, very much to be a general engineer. But he got stuck with this business, and all of a sudden, IBM came in, and he then turned all of those women. Now, this is awful. They had jobs. I mean, they no longer had a job because a machine did it for them. And he was down in Beardshire. I believe he had a couple of printers and just about two or three machines down in Beardshire Hall. And then, this is modern life. Then it grew and grew and grew, and now it is even divided into sections. Ag want their own thing. Music wants their own. When this was all done by my husband, and I thought he was very, very good. The other thing is, and this is the best part, when he came home from the war, my husband, I forgot to tell you, he went to Washington to be a computer at that time. He came home and he said to me, you know what, there's the neatest thing in Washington D.C. called pizza. And he said, I think the thing for us to do is to get into the pizza business. And I said, well, you can do it if you want, but you will not have me or the children because I will not have another restaurant in my life. Wow, is that okay? I'd be a millionaire now.
If you had only opened a pizza shop.
That's right. If we'd only opened that pizza shop, I had so much money I wouldn't know what to do with it. So that's my life.
Well, Barbara, it's been wonderful visiting with you. Thank you for letting us come
How
in.
can you sort that out?
Oh, it's fun. You tell us the way Ames was back then.
Well, back there, it was a very funny little town, but they had several stores on Main Street. There were Tilden's, and then was the next one was another,
the fair.
the fair. And all that, it had a great, I don't think we have a Main Street anymore. I think we've lost it.
It's certainly not a business district
Not
anymore.
anymore. And
They used to have
but
Pennies.
I remember then it was just a teeming thing and everything.
How about your brother?
My brother? My brother John?
Yeah, the doctor. Did you have a brother doctor?
Let's see. Well, he went to Iowa City to school. He graduated here. He was an honor student and graduated here, and I suppose in bugs or something, I don't know. He never knew really for sure what he was going to do with this, but he had a mother that urged him. I said to him, you have a brain. A lot of people don't. This is what we're going to do. Well, after he came home from the war, he entered Iowa City. He was chosen at that time. They were pretty good to take you in. He was a very homesick young man. He would come home from Iowa City every single weekend. We could count on him coming home. He hated his first life down there, and he would come home and I'd say the same thing. You got a brain, you have to make up your mind. You're either going to do this or what are you going to do? But after about 3 years of coming home every Friday night, he graduated as a surgeon, and he went to, guess what, Des Moines, and came home every weekend, until he found love down there. But he took his residency down there. She was a nurse, and then he stopped coming home. And they moved for a little while at Georgia, and then he didn't, he said, this is one of those things that I don't think I'm gonna like it down here very well. Why he chose Dallas, well actually it's, where do they live, Meg? You're just about right in the middle of it, I forgot that name. It's where McCarney is now.
Florida.
No, he's moved from Florida back to,
Oh,
I'm no help, I'm not a sports.
anyway, he's
Sports
in
person.
another part of Texas that's kind of a suburb of Dallas. And anyway, he has started out down there, he and his wife, working, but he didn't like the group idea of a physician because he always felt like that he worked the hardest and the other people, like just the ordinary family practice, didn't have to work nearly as hard as he did. So he started his own practice with his wife, and then came a partner, and then came another partner, and then another partner. So he has his own group that he uses, as opposed to what we do here with McFarland Clinic. But he has to work awfully hard to make a living under those circumstances. But down there, at the present time, I will tell you, they are saying no more Medicare. He isn't. He said, there I am, taking care of the kids and whatever. But many physicians will say, I won't take any more Medicare. There's just too many of you, and I can't. Texas is awfully, a lot of people.
Yeah, yes.
It really and truly is.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we do appreciate your story. This was very fascinating. Thank you so much.
I just thought, what am I going to say to these people?
You didn't have a bit of trouble.